really wanted to do today was really review with you what research methods are typically used in pragmatic studies. And this is particularly in case any of you are interested in doing this work, either as part of your 595 in your MA, your thesis, if you decide to do one for your MA, or if you are pursuing your PhD, to give you an idea of how you can approach this and how it has been approached over time. So this is an article that's in your doc share, and it goes through some of the history of the ways in which pragmatic research has developed. So you've got the study itself, the focus of the study, the languages that were investigated in the study, the subjects, and then the methodology. So what is the focus of all these studies?
Speech acts.
Speech acts, okay? And I think I said to you right at the beginning, most SLA work is in speech acts, okay? Why is that, do you think?
It's easy.
Yes, that is in fact one of the reasons why. You know, those of you that are thinking of doing a thesis or going to do your 595, you know, you've got a period of time. You've got to get the show on the road. You've got to get the study done. You've got to get the study written. So frankly, one of the easiest things to do is do written DCTs, you know, on a speech act, and then just say, here you go, right? It's not different for a lot of these people either. So in this case, you've got invitations, requests, apologies, and requests. A lot of requests. Why would there be a lot of request studies? Think about what we talked about last week. Go, Diego.
A lot of people's goal of learning a language is to be able to use it. And so the first thing that you learn to do, or like the primary thing that you want to do in another language is being able to communicate actions and.
Right, you're getting there. You're making it too complicated.
They don't need to talk about research. They just need to get.
Yeah, but you're making it too complicated. Why requests?
It's very common, I guess.
You learn how to be polite, maybe?
Right. What do we call requests? What do we call those? What sort of speech acts are those?
Face threatening.
Face threatening. Excellent. Good. Requests are face, so you're just making it more complicated. You were right. Face threatening acts. Requests are face threatening acts. Why? Because you have to ask something of somebody, okay, or somebody is asking something of you. So it's face threatening act for both speaker and hearer and speaker. So of course cross-cultural people are sort of interested in how that face threatening act works out between one language and another, right? If we have the same strategies of handling it, okay? So quite a lot with Hebrew and Arabic. Here we've got the type of studies. What does that mean? LOR. Yes, it does. It means length of residence. And what does that mean?
Length of residence in the native, I mean, like in the bad place, like America.
In that place. Yeah, exactly. So this is length of residence in America, right? Or length of residence, yes, it is. It's length of residence in America. So it's 2 years, less than 10 years, more than 10 years. Okay, that's the group of the kinds of, and then you had native speaker Hebrew as your control group, right? Oh, so this must be living in Israel, actually. This must be length of residence in Israel, because these are second language learners of Hebrew. And then your control group is native speakers of Hebrew, right? And then here what you have is the choice of the methodology that they used. So Give me an example of that. We did that, right? Yeah. So what would that be?
So two students, you give them a scenario and then they
Yep.
actually act out. Right?
Yep. And they role play that. Or you put a student with a native speaker, right? And see how they do with that scenario. Okay, what about this?
This is when you rate it like from 0 to be highly polite or appropriate to 5 highly inappropriate.
Good, good. So this one is studying the appropriateness of the requests. And you don't have to do anything, you just see them or hear them, and then you get to rate it. 0, really inappropriate, 5, highly appropriate, right? And that way we get your perception of what you think is going on, okay? And then what does that stand for? Not, I know you did a whole paper, somebody else. Does anyone remember what that?
What we show with the emails on the student
Yeah.
side.
Do you remember what this stands for, Naomi? Oh, Diego. Oh, Malachi.
Course, like complete this or something like that.
Yeah, good, very close. Jade, tell us.
Discourse completion test.
Yeah. She did it already in her. Yeah, good. So that's a discourse completion task, right? That's where you get a thing and then you ask people to respond. Okay, so these are typical cross-sectional studies. What does cross-sectional mean?
It's a different section. I don't know.
No, it's more like this.
Like cat.
Right? Slice of time. Cross-sectional means one slice of time, okay? So it's not over time, okay? It's just one. So you're testing 10 beginning students one time, testing advanced one time, okay? So cross-sectional just means it's a one-time test of their current interlanguage, pragmatic interlanguage development, okay? Now, if you do this, the idea of this is, what's the other one? If cross-sectional is one slice of time, does anyone know the name for studies that go over time? Good, longitudinal studies, okay? Now this is called a quasi-longitudinal study. Shige is doing one of these. Does anyone think why that is?
So I guess the researcher doesn't trace back all of the period of time, 10 years or 2 years.
Right. But how is it longitudinal?
It's not the same students over that period of time, it's different sections.
Good. What you're trying to get, rather than have the same student, so we follow Shihun from less than 2 years. How long have you been here now? More than 2 years. No, still less than 2. Still less than 2? Crikey. Okay. So, but let's. I feel like I've known you for so much longer. Let's imagine that at this point, you've got Shihun is a model or an exemplar, is what I mean, an exemplar of this group. Okay. And then you pick somebody else who's been here for more than 2 years but less than 10, and somebody else who's been here for more than 10. That way you're sort of pretending you've got one learner over time. You've got a learner who's gone from beginner to intermediate to advanced. So it's a way for you to say this is probably how an individual student develops over time. Okay, because I'm looking at these different stages in their learning. But it's not the same student. So you can't call it longitudinal, which would be, it would have to be the one same student. But quasi-longitudinal, because you're sort of, you're trying to do it without having to trace one student. So Shige, one of your colleagues, is tracing the development of intonation and stress across Japanese learners, from beginners to advanced. So because he doesn't want to spend the next 10 years doing his PhD, he didn't pick a group of little Japanese that he will then follow for 10 years. What he did was get 30 beginners, 30 intermediate, 30 advanced, and he's doing this quasi-longitudinal study. Huh? Yeah, it is cool, actually. It's a way to do it, because part of the problem with longitudinal studies is you can never get the subjects to stay around. They always leave. A friend of mine who works at Georgia Tech, Kyoko, did a longitudinal study of Japanese acquisition of L and R. And by the time she got to the end game, out of 8 students, she only had 2 left. So it was like a 8 or 9 year study. She only had 2 left. So when she went to publish it, they said they weren't interested. So, well, because they only had 2 left. So, you know, so it's really, people get scared of doing longitudinal research, quite rightly, I think, because, you know, as I say, you don't want to spend 10 years following your subjects around and then another 2 years writing up your dissertation. You'll be here until the time you die.
That's why most of the researchers choose their children, and they use their own children.
Yes. That's exactly right. A lot of longitudinal research is with people's kids. They choose their own kids because they have to be with them every day. So then they record them like once every 2 weeks. They have them record the same thing over and over, and that way they show how they develop. It's absolutely true. Yeah. Here's some more. Greeting, request, assessment of assertiveness, refusal. Refusal would be another face-threatening act, right? Again, you see that almost entirely it's speech acts. Then you have the languages that are involved. Again, your subjects. Now, in this case, you've got 2 DCTs, a rating scale, a DCT plus a verbal protocol. Does anybody know what that is? Anyone know? Okay, so a verbal protocol means you ask the participant to explain why they just did that, okay? So you would give them a DCT, let's say it's a spoken DCT, and you say, what would you say if I asked you, you know, to go to the movies and you didn't want to go, and you say, so I say, will you go to the movies with me? And then you give a spoken DCT. So you say, well, no, because I can't, you know. Then the researcher replays that back to you and says, why did you make this choice? Why did you make that choice? Why are you saying this? And that protocol is sort of gives more depth to the DCT, because you actually hear what the people are thinking about why, in terms of why they made that choice. Now, what a lot of people will do, because that's a lot of work, obviously, if you're trying to take every, let's say you had, you send out on surveygizmo.com, you send out 120 written DCTs, okay? You don't then want to try and interview 120 people, right? Because then, again, you're going to be here till the end of time, right? So Hessar, one of my other PhD students, who's looking at phonology, teaching pronunciation in Saudi Arabia, she's doing like 120 surveys on Survey Gizmo, and then she says at the bottom, would you be willing to be interviewed? And she's going to take 10 of the sort of standard responses, the people that give standard responses, and do interviews on those 10, okay? So that gives you, it gives you all your quantitative data, 120 people, plus a little more like, meat in terms of qualitative data. What are people probably thinking about? What themes come out from these interviews? Sorry, this is all a bit, longitudinal studies, much broader scope, right? So you have longitudinal studies, as we said, means that you follow the same person or the same people over time. So what's the first thing that you notice about the subjects? For the most part, not in everything, but for the most part. How many are there?
They're like very
Yeah,
few.
not many, right? Not many. If we go back to looking at the cross-sectional ones, you've got, up to 59 in one case. In this case, you've got 160, 80 in each group. Okay, as soon as you start looking at longitudinal studies, you're usually talking much fewer people. This is actually a lot. And it's because it was only barely longitudinal, meaning that they looked at them at the beginning of the semester and they looked at them at the end of the semester so they could track them. True longitudinal studies go over years, right? So when you've got people like these people, with 1, 2, 3. Okay, now these often have a broader scope. There's some speech acts, obviously, but then there's also much broader things like pragmatic competence, testing your pragmatic competence overall, not just as one particular speech act, okay? And there's different ways of measuring that than you would measure speech acts, right? So authentic classroom discourse, what that means is they followed a class of students, and usually they talk to them at they teach them something explicitly, then they have them practice it, they record all that, and then at the end of the semester they have them practice it, they have them do an exercise again, and they see the curve of their learning. If they remembered what they learned and so on. So these tend to have larger numbers because they're usually what we call an intact class that you're just using for that one semester or maximum 2 semesters. Sociolinguistic interview. So this is Japanese as a second language. And this is a Japanese particle, and I know there are people out there that understand this better than I do. I don't speak Japanese, but basically it's one of the particles that you use for pragmatics, not for syntax. So to a higher status person or something like that, some pragmatic reason. And because this article was done in English, so you have 11 American Japanese as second language learners, right? So you have them do exercises with that, and then at the end you ask them, do they understand, right? So the sociolinguistic interview part means it's an interview with the student, but it's about a sociolinguistic issue or pragmatic issue. In this case, do you understand what this particle does? What's it for? And we'll look at that more with the Minagishi cook. And then this one is a diary study. And diary studies are quite common in second language acquisition when it comes to longitudinal studies of individuals. Okay. And in fact, one of the most famous studies ever was done as a diary study. This is Schmidt, Richard Schmidt, 1983. He did a 3-year study of Wes, a guy he called Wes, a Japanese adult learner in Hawaii. And this actually was the seminal study for all upcoming diary studies of second language learners. Yeah, they all in some way adopted the protocols that were used in Schmidt's study. In fall, we have a visit from the ex-president of AAAL, Kathy Bailey, who is going to come and talk about her oeuvre, her whole life experience, and her whole work that she's done over a 35-year career. She made very famous diary studies of language learning, talking about the anxieties that go with language learning. So she started learning French, then she started writing a diary of how horrible it was. how much she hated some of the other learners that were so great and she wasn't so great, and so there is absolutely a place for diary studies, but of course it's going to be a single person usually. So it's not a great choice for a dissertation project because it's only a single person and it's difficult to get it published, but it's a pretty good pilot. If you want to do a pilot on something, you can pick just one person. It'd be fine for a 595 to do something like that. Andrew Cohen and Siegel both documented resistance to Japanese norms. There's a lot of this stuff, because Japanese is so awesome, apparently, in terms of really making it specific. Either you're doing it right, and you're following the honorifics, or you're not doing it right. So there's no sort of gray area in between, and it's all encoded in a language. So, and we've talked about this before too. Cohen studied some female learners of Japanese who resisted this higher pitch that they were being asked to produce by their Japanese teacher. Empirical methods, if you decide to do one. Were yours written or oral DCTs, Jane?
Mine?
Written.
Yeah. Plus common part that they have to provide.
Right. So it's right. Yeah. So you can do written or oral DCTs. In general, if you ask someone to tell you, if you do a verbal protocol of asking someone to tell you what they're doing, that's the closest we can to natural data. You get a lot more information. DCTs, we know the responses. There's been so many of these DCT studies now. We know that the responses are shorter in length, simpler in wording, less face attentive. What does that mean? Anyone give it a go?
In terms of not threatening?
Well, in terms of either way, right?
Not.
In terms of not seeming to be focused as much as you would be in reality on face, right? So this could have been the reason that my student, for example, didn't get a good result when she put out her trees, asking everyone to come and do her trees, and she didn't get a good result. It could be because, if she had asked face to face, the people that she was asking may have been more face attentive. In other words, they would have felt worse about saying no to her because it would have been right in front of them. So they might have in fact said yes or something else. But because she literally gave them the opportunity just to write an email, they were less face attentive. We know that this happens in written DCTs, okay? Less emotionally involved, less negotiation. So in other words, written DCTs can give you some information, but they're really not the gold standard, because we know from all these studies that in reality people do a lot more work usually than they're willing to write on a written DCT. So oral DCTs are considerably better. You can elicit up to twice as much data than written DCTs, including things like use of pragmatic particles and so on. But again, right, are you going to do 120 oral DCTs? You know, that's like 6 months of your life that you never get back, right? So if you're going to do something like a dissertation and you really want to get into it, then it's worth it. But otherwise, you know, you've got to start thinking about resources, right? Field notes. This used to be very common and is very common in linguistic anthropology, not so common in applied linguistics. And that's because they're often inaccurate, right? Field notes just means you hear someone apologizing to someone and you're like, oh, awesome. I needed an apology. I needed one to like an example of one, right? Let's say it's apology that's going really badly, okay? Or a request that's going really badly and you're like, oh, awesome, I need to get, but, you know, on the plus side, it gets you data that's perfect, you know, because it's real. On the minus side, you know, it can be inaccurate. So ideally what you want is that article that we looked at last week where we recorded the teacher and the student talking. So we can guarantee what's going wrong because we have a recording of the whole thing, right? But obviously field notes means that it's not an experimental situation. You just happen to be walking by and this fabulous linguistic thing is going on. Multiple choice surveys, not great. So in terms of DCTs, they're worse than DCTs because people just pick, you know, they're simply not long enough. You can't put enough information on a multiple choice survey. Role plays, great. Same issue as spoken DCTs. If you can get that many role plays, great. Rating scales, okay. Verbal protocols, okay. So it's not that there's an ideal way. What you have to do is combine what it is that you want to do with a research method and deal with whatever limitations that presents. So my student in Georgia State did a great job collecting those, those refusals under what was essentially natural. You know, they thought they were really refusing a genuine thing, right? On the other hand, it was in writing, which wasn't ideal. And I think what happened, the reason it didn't fit the bulge theory that we talked about was because people were being less face attentive, you know, than they would have been if she'd done it face to face. All natural data, you know, just really tricky, right? Did we talk to you about Nancy Bell? Is that what we're talking to you about? Sal's friend, Nancy Bell. She's a humor scholar. She wrote a book on failed humor, and she did this by going around telling really awful jokes. She would tell a couple of really awful jokes, and then like as though they were genuine, and then get people's feedback. You know, so it was natural data. You know, she would then note down what people's responses were to foul humor. And Sal wrote her introduction, her preface, and said that he thought the bravest thing that she did was go around pretending that these were real jokes, that she actually thought these terrible jokes were funny. And so there's lots of different ways you can do that. But of course, when it comes to things like requests, you know, you might not be in the right place at the right time to get anywhere near as many as you need, you know, so that can be a real problem. right, so then lastly, we're going to look at our spotlight study. And I think I've talked about this before, but this is now in your dossier, so you can have a look at it. It's a wonderful piece of classroom research by Minagishi Cook, who was teaching Japanese to Americans in Hawaii, okay? So these are American undergraduates learning Japanese. So she was trying to see if they could distinguish, the American students could distinguish the polite from the impolite styles. So she would teach them, for example, over time, because they was intermediate students, so they had a bunch of students. Honorific language just meaning if you're talking to someone who is higher status than you, you use different language. You don't just look more, you don't look nicer, you just use completely different language. And you also might use sentence final particles. So for example, this would be, from what I understand, although anyone out there who speaks Japanese, if I've got this wrong, tell me, and I will rectify it in virtual office. My understanding is that this would be the sort of normal one. You know, if it wasn't a high status or a difference of status, you would just say, thank you very much for giving me help with this. That's sort of what that means. But if it's someone where there's a status difference or a big social distance between you and them, then you would actually change some of the verb form itself and also add a particle or something up at the end here as well. So in other words, it's not that you just make it sound nicer. You actually, honorific language means you're actually using different forms, okay? Sometimes different noun forms, different verb forms, and so on. So what she did was a study of 120 intermediate learners, 12 sections, 8 instructions, so that's a lot of people, right? And what the students did was complete a listening test in which they listened to tapes of 3 different job applicants for a clothing store, okay? So one of the foremost requirements of this job is the need to speak polite or respectful Japanese. In other words, when you're helping people in the store, you need to talk to them like this, not like this, right? So they're told, they're given the outline, the American students are given the outline of what the job wants and what they should be doing. And then they listened to the 3 tapes and then they chose which they thought was the best applicant. What was the difference in the applicants? Well, A had the best qualifications in terms of having sold clothes before or whatever else. But he consistently, or she, consistently used no honorifics whatsoever. So all the students, almost all the students chose A, and A was in fact the worst candidate because when he did the interview, he used no honorifics at all. So all the instructors were really shocked because from the time that these American learners had been in Japanese 101, they'd all been taught explicitly about honorific language. Yet when they asked them, the ones that didn't choose it, only 6 out of these 120 students even said, well, he or she should have used honorific language. My personal favourite thing was the fact that they were all so shocked, which is, Minagishi Cook says, we were all so shocked. And as I've said many times, you have no idea what it is learners actually learn. You put something in front of them, but you have no idea what they're actually learning. Or not learning, as the case may be. So that study is a really interesting one, and it's in your doc share, and you can go ahead and read it. So although I don't have any examples of this, more recently we're moving away from the endless focus on speech acts, okay? So now we're also looking at things like interactional markers, back channeling, use of particular kinds of particles, interactional norms, meaning verbal and non-verbal, everything from lighting, getting people to stand in, well, Amanda Kay, why don't you come up here for me? So you get them to stand here and then right now. Now what we do is say when you feel like we're at the right distance apart, you stop moving. In order to talk to me. Yeah. So is that good for you?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's how long for your average North American, probably. Is that much space. But what they then, thank you very much, America. What they then do is do this with all kinds of learners and all kinds of situations and all kinds of status differences and so on. And you get these articles with all these little circles, like foot and a half, 2 feet,
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. And another one is eye contact. Eye contact is a huge intercultural difference, whether you make eye contact, whether you don't make eye contact. So that's another one that's come under a lot of recent study. Mitigation strategies, ways in which you try and mitigate refusals or so on. So not just the refusal itself, but how do you mitigate? Both, again, verbally and non-verbally. Your mitigation might be non-verbal. It might be like, you make a sort of sad face. Oh, really wish I could, but I can't, And we had really not looked at this kind of information before, yet clearly it's designed to be another level of mitigation to make your refusal sound less bad. And also pragmatic misfires. And a typical pragmatic misfire would be the one that we looked at in the article last week, where the Korean instructor says approximately. He does that translation from Korean to say, yes, I approximately know how to score bowling, which in Korean means I totally know how to score bowling, but in American English means do you or don't you know, right? So that's what we would call a pragmatic misfire, okay? Because he didn't realize that it was a misfire and she didn't realize what he was actually trying to do. So a lot more interesting stuff and tons out there left to do for you guys if anybody wants to do any of them. So lots and lots and lots of questions you want to ask. Now I would say one thing, several of you have talked to me about theses and 595s. The only problem with pragmatics is you have to get IRB approval to talk to people. So it's not a problem if you choose like adults who are normal and you can find them in college and whatever. But as soon as you start saying, as one of our students did a few years ago, I want to look at the pragmatic misfires of autistic children, then, which is fabulous. I mean, would be a fascinating project, but you can't get IRB permission to go off and look at autistic children, unfortunately. So unless you're really willing to sort of sit there and spend another year and a half on top of your normal time, you don't want anything that's going to give the IRB trouble, which means you're sort of, stuck with adults who are not in prison, not pregnant, not under 18, the usual.
Wait, not pregnant?
Say that again?
Not pregnant?
Pregnant women also, if you have deliberately include pregnant women in your study, you have to get special approval. Yeah. Not that I imagine why you would want to deliberately include pregnant women for pragmatics, but I mean, certainly I know that when people are pregnant, they get sick and tired of people's behavior, right? People sort of coming up and panning them and sort of treating them as though the baby belongs to everybody and it's inside you. And yeah, so that might be interesting, but that will take a while. Yeah. All right. Any questions, comments?
I have a question.
Yes, Felicia.
Going back to the diary studies, they usually track a single person's comments. Why don't they follow several, and would it be better if you had a study of 3 or 4 diaries?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yes and no. The problem with diary studies is that you have a huge amount of data to go through. And every time, so what you do is you have to pull out themes inside the diary, right? And the way you used to have to do that the old-fashioned way, which was literally you went in and you looked at the writing, you said, this word appears a lot, that word appears a lot, you know, da, da, da. Now you can have computer software help you pull out those themes, the things that seem most interesting. But as soon as you have more than one, obviously the workload expands. Now, I just did a PhD with Frank Alexander, who he did that. He basically said he wanted more than one person, so he found himself 4 people. And he was looking at international nurses, so nurses that had started nursing in Vietnam, then come to America, retrained, and were now nursing in America. And he actually had 4 of those, and he was looking at all their academic product, all their professional output, and so on. And it was good. He learned some different things, but it took him a long time, Felicia. A lot longer than if he was doing a traditional diary study.
But it wouldn't necessarily make the data better.
I mean, yeah, that's good. Frank had 4 people from 4 different places in the world. So it was interesting to see the differences between them. In many ways, it might have been more interesting to have 4 people all from Vietnam.
Right.
And then see, you know, because then you could try and get a better idea of what was maybe cross-culturally based and what might be idiosyncratic.
Right.
You know, like,
I was just thinking
just
about with like if you had students have an electronic diary and you would just search online for key terms, then it would make the process, I don't want to say simpler, but you know,
I mean,
easier to manage while considering a large data set. Yeah,
that is a really nice little methodology for something. As long as you can get the students to fill it out. You know, I hate to say it, but as soon as you ask students to do anything over any length of time, you're kind of screwed because they don't. But yeah, that in and of itself, the idea of that methodology would be great. Yeah, and then you would use computer software to help you work out. So, for example, Felicia, if you were teaching a new class in electronic communication and writing, and you wanted to find out how effective the students thought the activities were, and then correlate that with their final grades, you could have the final grades plus something like these diaries, you know, that they completed after each activity. You said, okay, you've now got 10 minutes, you all need to write down what you thought of that activity, what was useful, what was not useful. Then you would correlate those 2 pieces of information. That would be kind of awesome, actually. Yeah. Yeah. So there are lots of what we call mixed method designs, which that would be. That would be a mixed method because you would correlate, you would have both qualitative and then the quantitative final grades. And that's often the best way to get at linguistic things is some kind of mixed method approach where you get some quantitative and some qualitative data and you can kind of squidge it all together. That would be awesome. Are you thinking of doing that for your 595? Who knows, says Felicia, maybe. Yeah, you had a question.
I think you answered it. You said that there's not really this is the best approach to do any research project, but just kind of, what you would think is, what you would encourage us to do in terms of what you think will be most productive.
Yeah, and that's an excellent question, and one of the reasons why you should never try and do this on your own. And I'm particularly looking at the online people here, because I know that the interaction you get is minimal with us. But when it comes to things like your 5-9, like by that I mean your individual, me being able to talk to you individually. When it comes to your 599 and 595 though, you really do wanna, and you can talk to me, you can talk to Dr. Cheng, you can talk to whomever, you really do wanna say, look, I'm thinking of doing X, and I'm thinking of doing it this way, and let us help you shape that in the best way possible. So, because although there are usually many ways to skin a cat, as they say, which is absolutely horrible, there is usually a better way and a worse way. So it depends, Diego, on the question you're asking. Once we've established what question you're asking, there's usually a better way and a worse way of addressing that question. So by the time you've got the fact that it's you and all the constraints you may or may not have in your own life, the question that you want to ask, and the resources that you have or need to do that, that becomes the basis for your methodology. Almost always, that's the basis for your methodology. Yeah. And then, you follow some kind of methodological design within that. That's common in applied linguistics. So yeah, it's always a balancing one thing and another thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But always start with the question, because the question is the thing that drives everything else, But then, there'll be the ideal way to answer the question. Have 100 verbal protocols and interviews with 100 different people, Then there's that ain't gonna happen. So, what can I manage to do in the time that I have and with the resources that I have that's still valuable? Yeah. Good. Any other questions? Good. Well, that's it. Thanks very much for a very pleasant month. You know what you have to do to finish up. Please email me anytime if you have any questions about finishing up. Those of you, I'm looking forward to those of you I'm going to see in the fall. I think I'm doing sound systems in the fall, and one section of TESOL 1, but we have 70 students in TESOL 1, so we have 3 sections of TESOL 1. So I'll be doing one of those, but then we've got 2 other sections too. So yes, Felicia's laughing her head off. Felicia, when you came here, there was like 2 of you. Now there's 70 in TESOL 1, which is insane. What
is the bribe?
Say that again.
What's the bribe? You handing everyone candy? Sign up, sign up.
Right, yeah. Attilio, we do hope to see you again in another class if you can manage it. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you very much. It was my pleasure to be part of this class, and thanks also to all the other colleagues. Unfortunately, we cannot meet physically, but at least I had the chance to share this course with you, and thank you very much for all the course information details, and it was a terrific course, very, very nice. I was looking for a course like this. It was last time I attended a class was about 10 years ago. So after 10 years, it's good to be back.
Oh, good. Well, we'll take you back anytime. Okay.
Thank you so very much.
All right. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Oh, one more thing. Can I say hi? can I see Amanda again? Amanda K. Because
Hi.
she's my best friend in my head, but I've never seen her face. So hi.
Oh, come here, Amanda. Come here. She'll be able to see you. There she is.
I actually have lots of friends in the online classes.
I know. Everybody, this is Amanda Kay.
Popular.
Thank you for that, Felicia.
Bye, Felicia. Bye, Ateneo.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.